What specifically should
back here. Guys, if anyone's on the internet, they have to get off. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. I just hit no sound. Okay. Is that better? Set testing 1, 2 through 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Uh, I hear myself. Do you guys hear me? Quick test. If you give me yes, I just need a quick sound test on you guys. If you're there, give me a thumbs up. If you still can't hear me, you can use the little thumbs down there. Yes, good. Okay. Little glitch there. Um, I basically share the high speed with the whole family, and so all of a sudden I had a kind of blank, and it's probably Cox. But the point was, I think it was interfering, so I just pulled more bandwidth. Okay, it is so good to have everyone here, and these little glitches probably are the reason a lot of YouTubers just do this instead of live. They actually record. I like having a live audience. You guys are going to be able to see your own chat box again, and so we can make this real interactive tonight, which I'm really pretty thrilled with. Um, and so that all should work out. Oh, wow. It's just great. Okay. Um, give me a sec here. And I will go ahead, bring the PowerPoint up, and we'll be all set. Um, the minute you change anything on, I may go back to OBS if this kind of keeps up, because the minute you change anything, everything kind of gets lost. And but we will get this up and running. There we go. Should be with you in a second. There we are. There's our PowerPoint. I like Minicam better because it's a graphic interface, but it has its downsides. So you should be seeing that PowerPoint any minute now, especially if our high speed is better. And it is still giving us some grief here. So there we go. Hopefully, this will improve as the evening goes on. But I may be doing a little bit of work here. So the first thing we need to do is hear Rabbi Singer. And so I'm going to invite him into the room for about a 2-minute clip here. I do this again, and it gets harder and harder with him, to be frankly honest. I do this because I don't want to be accused of saying something or putting words in people's mouths. I want to be fair. I see what looks like a raised hand. So that's either a good hi or it's a question. Uh, but I'm going to go ahead and let Rabbi Singer speak for himself. Now, if something should go crazy with the Detractors Corner, let me know, because anything can, happen here. So let
do.
me get him.
This is laid out in Scripture in the clearest terms. There are many passages all over our sacred oracles. I'm going to choose, I always want to choose texts that are very graphic. There are so many texts. However, why not choose a text that is unassailable, that cannot be interpreted in any other way? Because after all, everything's at stake. You're watching this show and you have to make eternal decisions. So you don't want a text that's open to interpretation, so I'm not going to use them. I want to use a text that cannot be interpreted any other way. There are many of them. So I'm selecting this carefully. Deuteronomy chapter 30. Deuteronomy chapter 30, we are told, you can read from the beginning, verse 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, that a person should never say that the law is too difficult to keep. You shouldn't say the law is too far off, it's over sea, who will bring it to me? The Torah is in heaven, the commandments are in heaven, who will bring it down to me? No. Verse 14, the Torah, the commandments, the word, my word is close to you, it's in your heart, that you may do it. Verse 14, Deuteronomy 30. Paul, incidentally, in Romans 10, 6 through 8, please look it up for yourself. If you're interested, if you're not, please, you don't need, I'm not telling you to read Romans, but if you cross references to Romans chapter 10, verse 6 through 8, you'll fall off your chair if you're a Christian, make sure you're sitting down. Because Paul is going to take these passages where the Torah is saying, don't say it's too difficult to keep the Torah, the Torah is near, the word is near to you, you can do it, it's not too difficult. This is a theological disaster for the church because Paul says it is too difficult, no one can do it. Because we're all infected with what came to be known as the original sin. This is all over Romans, certainly Romans chapter 3. And Paul totally molests these texts. You want to be angry with me? So be angry. What am I supposed to do? Lie to you so you like me? I can't do that. What am I supposed to make up stuff and just be ecumenical so you send me a donation? I'm not.
Okay, let's get back to me here. You heard him. He just went on to say you don't have to give him money and you could dislike him, because he's telling you the truth. He's not telling you the whole truth. This is the problem. So let's take a look at this and see if the Torah really says that the Torah is really easy to keep, or if Paul's views related to the Torah really have a basis. So I'm going to transfer over here. That's a detractor's corner. That's what you're dealing with. He's even going to tell Christians to repent of believing in Jesus and get it right. That's what you're going to get from Rabbi Singer. So this just doesn't have... Okay, there we go. I'm just trying to get back to here we are. He's going to basically say Paul got it all wrong. Okay. So, we're going to start with an assumption that he's making that's totally bogus as an assumption. Okay. Frogs with no legs can't hear. You guys want to hear a funny story that you can use when you're talking to somebody to kind of point out a problem? And kind of show some reasoning that's off. Let me tell you a story. There was this scientist. Hopefully, you're not offended if I make him. I'll make him an Abyssinian scientist because nobody calls himself an Abyssinian anymore. And he wanted to figure out how far frogs with no legs could jump. So he cuts off. He says, "Jump." The frog jumps 12 feet. He cuts off one of the frog's feet and says, "Jump." The frog only jumps 10 feet. He cuts off another of the frog's feet and says, "Jump," and the frog only makes it about 6 feet. He cuts off the third of the frog's legs and says, "Jump." and the frog only is able to jump about 2 feet. He cuts off the last of the frog's legs and says, jump, and the frog doesn't move. And he says, jump again, and the frog doesn't move. And he concludes in a scientific journal that frogs with no legs can't hear. See, if you start with the wrong premise, you will always arrive at the wrong conclusion. You have to be, if you're going to be honest, you have to be willing to look at the premise. Now, Rabbi Singer starts with the wrong premise. Okay, he assumes that intellectual capability and physical capability equals moral capability. In other words, if you can understand the Torah and you're physically capable of doing the Torah, then naturally you're perfectly morally capable of doing the Torah. And that's an underlying assumption, because he has removed the idea that man's nature is fallen, which is a totally bogus position to put people in. And it's a wrong conclusion. Frogs with no legs can't hear. He's guilty of this. So let's talk about moral capability here. First of all, Rabbi Singer ignores the Hebrew Scriptures. Let's look at what the Hebrew Scriptures say about human nature. And then we'll look at what the Torah itself indicates about Israel's ability to keep the Torah. All right? The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They have all done abominable things. There is none that does good. The Lord looks down from heaven to see if there are any who understand, who seek God. They have turned aside. They have become together. They have together become corrupt. There is none that does good. No, not one. Now that's Hebrew Scripture. Now, if he wants to go ahead and say that the Psalms are uninspired and they aren't part of God's word, he could go ahead. But this is the Hebrew Scripture's view of humankind. By the way, he could try to say that that's David's view of humankind, and David was just a pessimist. But you'll notice the Lord looks down from heaven upon the children of earth, children of men, to see if there are any who understand, who seek God. There is none that does good, no, not one. So I'm not making this up. Rabbi Singer, are you willing to repudiate the Tanakh or parts of the Tanakh, or are you willing to acknowledge that what Paul says about human nature, the Hebrew Scriptures clearly affirm? He didn't get the idea from nowhere. He got the idea from the book, Rabbi Singer, that you're supposed to believe. But, maybe that's not enough. Let's hear from Solomon, considered to be one of the wisest of humankind. There is not a just man on earth who does good and does not sin. Solomon could see the same thing David could, that human beings are innately broken morally. They're not capable of doing proper righteousness on their own. See, that's the thing Rabbi Singer is ignoring. He thinks man is capable of keeping Torah. Now, when I say keeping Torah, I don't mean keeping Torah every 2 weeks. Okay, because that's not keeping Torah. I don't mean occasionally keeping some of the commandments. Okay? That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about keeping Torah. And the Hebrew Scriptures affirm man's moral brokenness. Now, I'm going to include a picture. This is really interesting in light of the recent events. Now, Rabbi Singer didn't originally do this during this time period, but it tells me he's no historian, I'll tell you that. Because if he knew anything about history, he would go ahead and understand that recent events really give us a picture of events in general that have been going on. I'm really kind of hoping that picture comes up. We've gone back to poor. So hopefully things will improve as we go here. There's the picture, though. We did get it. I'm not making a comment about any sort of prejudice or race issues here. Okay, I'm just showing a bunch of burning buildings that were burned by riots and looting. Okay, I mean, those are what those are. But I have these pictures because people were rioting and looting. That's the point. Do people who are innately good riot and loot? I mean, is Is that common Torah behavior, Rabbi Singer? You know, Rabbi Zacharias said that one of the easiest doctrines to prove if one studies history is the depravity of man. It is really simple to prove. And so this is history. Not only do the Hebrew scriptures affirm man's moral brokenness, but our eyeballs affirm man's moral brokenness. It's easy. We could keep Torah, right? Well, there's a picture of a bunch of people easily keeping Torah. I mean, this is an absurdity to go ahead. Let me give you a great Rabbi Zacharias quote. I'm not going to say he was the greatest apologist because that would infer that everyone who comes after him can't be as great. And I don't know who all the apologists are. But he was an incredible apologist, and he had a unique ability to apply the gospel to the human situation in very eloquent terms. Okay, and so this will come up right now. The reason we have 17,000 pages in our law books is because we cannot follow 10 lines on a tablet made of stone. Rabbi Zacharias said it best. Rabbi Singer, you say the Torah is not too far from us. You say that means that we're perfectly morally capable of keeping the Torah. The Hebrew scriptures say, and I didn't go to all the places where I could point out moral brokenness, because we're going to see what the Torah says about Israel's ability to keep the Torah. Let's get the Torah's testimony on this. But the Hebrew scriptures themselves don't affirm that people are not morally broken. Now, I think we need to keep the balance between the image of God in people and man's moral brokenness. And Dr. Brown kind of touches on that. But the thing we can't say is that man isn't morally broken, and so he is able to keep the law. And so that's fairly clear. But the coolest thing is the Torah affirms Israel can't keep the Torah. So let's go to the Torah itself and see whether Israel could keep the Torah. This is great. We look at the chapter immediately after the verses that Rabbi Singer's using, okay? In other words, chapter 30 is what he's using to affirm that we can keep the Torah. We turn over one chapter and we look at the verses after these verses and get Moses' clear understanding of the moral brokenness of Israel. This is Moses speaking to Israel one chapter after 30, which he says indicates that Israel could morally keep the Torah. For I know your rebellion and your stiff-necked. If today, while I am yet alive with you, you have been rebellious against the Lord, how much more after my death? The import of these words is pretty simple, in case you couldn't miss it. But let's just put it in modern day language. Let's just put it in the vernacular of the day. This is English, I know, but here's the thing. You guys are such total failures. It follows, in following the Lord, then when I was alive, I'm certain you will never be able to keep Torah when I'm dead. I mean, that's what Moses is literally saying here. You couldn't keep Torah when I was alive and I was with you. Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our teacher, was with Israel and they never managed to keep Torah. And then he says, and knowing that you guys have done such a bang-up perfect job of doing it while I'm alive, I am certain that once I'm dead, you're going to have major problems. This is the Torah saying they can't keep Torah. You've been in rebellion against the Lord while I was with you. You had the Torah, you had me, and you still didn't keep the Torah. Really, Rabbi Singer? Paul's wrong. Israel could just keep the Torah? Is that what the Torah seems to indicate? Not according to Moses, it doesn't. Oh, but let's go further. Let's go to Numbers. Now, here's the cool thing. You want to know what Torah does when the children of Israel disobey Torah? It adds more Torah. When the children of Israel disobey the law, God gives more law. He gives more restrictions, kind of like a misbehaving child. And so you say, okay, not only can't you have the not only can't you use the car, but you're grounded from going out for 2 weeks. Okay, God increases the number of restrictions because Israel isn't following the restrictions to begin with. Let's look at Numbers. Now, I've got to look at 2 sections of Numbers just to make this a little shorter for you. I was going to bring a Talit Katan and a Talit, but you guys have seen that if you've been on my show. Now, while the children of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering sticks on the Sabbath day. This isn't some pagan man. The implication is that it's an Israelite man. And those who found him gathering sticks brought him to Aaron and Moses and to all the congregation. And they put him under guard because it had not been explained what should be done with him. So he's broken the Sabbath, okay? He's broken the Sabbath. They catch him breaking the Sabbath. They put him under guard. They bring him to Moses and Aaron and wait for God to give them the exact procedure of dealing with this. They knew about the Sabbath. This is Numbers. Exodus has already given them the 10 Commandments. All right. But, in case there's a problem here. And again, the Lord, okay. Now, they end up stoning him. This isn't germane to our point here. Okay. He's broken the law. And again, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel. Tell them to make tassels on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and to put a blue thread in the tassel of the corners. And you shall have the tassel that you may look on it and remember all the commandments of the Lord and do them, that you may not," notice this, "follow the harlotry to which your own heart and eyes are" what? Inclined. So what is God saying? First of all, he's saying that their eyes are inclined to spiritual harlotry. And their heart is inclined to spiritual harlotry. Now, God could have said to Moses, "I know that this was one incident, and the rest of the children of Israel all keep Torah perfectly. And so you don't need that." God did not want to have to kill more of his people. And so what does God do? You know why additional commandments are added to Torah? Because people didn't keep Torah. It's very simple. Rabbi Singer, if people kept the 10 Commandments, would they need additional instruction here? Um, and so this is just another indication that, the children of Israel couldn't keep Torah. Moses said they had not been keeping Torah and were not able to keep it. The Hebrew scripture said people are not able to keep it. God said, you guys haven't been keeping it. You blew it again with one of the guys who went out. The community as a whole did not keep Torah. By the way, I'm putting a tassel on the corners of your garments so you don't follow your evil inclination to sin. I mean, that's what it's saying here. The harlotry to which your own heart and your own eyes are what? Inclined. It's right there. One chapter after Rabbi Singer claims that verse is there. Now let's look at some Jewish sources. What does Deuteronomy 30, and he's making a big thing of Deuteronomy 30, what does Deuteronomy 30 mean? He says it means that don't say, "Paul, you're totally messed up, Paul. You're totally twisting scriptures. Don't say that you can't keep the law, that the Torah is too hard." That's what clearly God is saying. Well, let's look at some Jewish sources and see what he's saying. Now, he read you the verses here, okay? And he went there. Actually, my translation is even better. For the commandment to which I command you today is not too mysterious for you, nor is it far away, nor is it in heaven, nor should you say, who will ascend into heaven to bring it for us, or bring it to us, that you may hear it and do it, nor is it beyond the sea that you should say. This is, by the way, verses 11, 12, 13, all the way through 14. Nor is it beyond the sea that you should say, who will go over to the sea and bring it to us, that you may hear it and do it? For the word is very near you, in your mouth and in your heart. And he says, well, that means you can keep Torah. Well, what do Jewish commentators say? Well, let's just look at one Jewish source. This isn't Paul, by the way. Okay, again, do you pay attention to your own sources? Obadiah Siforno. I'll tell you who he was in just a little bit. Now, I don't have the writings of Obadiah Siforno in my library. Okay. But let's just see how he takes these verses. This is a Jewish commentator on these verses. It is not beyond your understanding that you should have need for prophets to explain the way of repentance, nor is it far away that you should have need of wise men of the generation who are far away to expound it for you in such a manner that you may be able to do it while still in exile. And this he explains by saying it is not in heaven. There is no aspect of repentance which necessitates the amplification, literally telling of a prophet. Neither is it beyond the sea that you have no need of wise men of the generation who are far away to expound it in such a manner that it is possible for you to do in exile. All right? So he's saying something about what this verse means, and what he's saying is it's comprehensible to you, not that you're morally able to do it. It's comprehensible. The point of that passage, 12 through 14 in Deuteronomy 30, is that the law is comprehensible. That's what a Jewish commentator is saying. Who is this Jewish commentator that he should be saying such things? And not checking with Rabbi Singer first, obviously. I mean, I'm being a little, facetious here, but the reality is, who came first, Rabbi Singer or Obadiah Saforno, who obviously is getting this wrong, like Paul. He was an Italian rabbi, Bible commentary, philosopher, and physician. He was born in 1475 and died in 1515. So this is one of those guys that's a medieval sage of Israel, interpreting Deuteronomy that the law is comprehensible, not that morally Israel could do it perfectly. Okay? Looking at the Jewish source and looking at the language there, which he wants to say means that you can morally keep the law, the meaning really becomes clear. It's not saying anything about the easiness of keeping Torah or that people can easily do it. It's not saying anything about whether people are sinners. Moses is telling the people, or actually there's that human pen thing, okay? The point of the passage is it's not outside your accessibility. You don't have to go somewhere far to access what it is saying. It's comprehensible, it's accessible. It's not in heaven that someone needs to bring it down so you can understand it. And Michael Brown answers this objection. In any case, the passage is not stating keeping the Torah is easy. Rather, it's stating it's totally accessible and clear, not in the heavens or over the sea. The second clause, not in the heavens, means not in the sky. It's not outside your understanding. You can understand Torah. But that doesn't mean you can keep Torah. Again, remember what I pointed out. Having the intellectual ability to do something and the physical ability to do something doesn't mean you have the moral capability of doing something. I should make that a refrigerator magnet saying. Just having the physical capability and intellectual capability does not give you the moral ability. And so this is what's being ignored very, very clearly. In fact, the hysterical thing is Rabbi Singer hates the idea of a sin nature. Now, he keeps calling it original sin, okay? I'm going to use the term the fallenness of man. Now, he wants to use the term original sin because he wants to blame it on Catholicism. Okay, whenever he paints Christianity, he generally seeks to paint it as Roman Catholicism. And so, all of Paul's ideas are basically viewed through a Roman Catholic lens. Very rarely does he accurately represent evangelical thought. And he doesn't really accurately represent New Testament thought. But he wants to say that man is basically good. That man's basic inclination is good. And the Torah is perfectly able being done. So let's look again at the sages. Okay, and I actually have the book. I pointed out before. It's Urbach's The Sages of Israel. It's a great book for a distillation, but it's a lot thicker than Every Man's Talmud. Let's look at this, okay? Now, I have to explain the Yasser Ra is the evil inclination in man. Now, the view of the rabbis as far as the sin nature is not the view that you're used to. I have to understand that they did not have a well-developed doctrine of sin, okay? And you do need to understand that the rabbinical Jewish view of humankind, one, is not where it was during the medieval commentators and before, and two, you need to understand that it's not where the New Testament would put it. But classical Judaism postulates a Yasser Chai and a Yasser Ra, a good inclination and a bad inclination. Think of it more like the shoulder angels sort of thing, the good angel and the fallen angel, devil on the shoulders thing. That was more the way they looked at it. But they believed that man did have an evil inclination. And they did not believe the Torah was strong enough to overcome man's evil inclination. In other words, the law was not strong enough to overcome our inclination to evil, which would still be our moral brokenness. Let me read their material to you. Despite their great faith in the power of Torah to be of help in the struggle against the Yasser, that's the Yasser Ra, the evil inclination people, the sages did not think the Torah was able, as long as it was in the possession of man, to uproot the evil inclination completely. Now, what does that say? If we understand the evil inclination as the sin nature, the Torah cannot completely uproot the sin nature. All right? In any case, the Torah cannot uproot the evil inclination that is part of our nature. Now, is Paul consistent? Paul is perfectly consistent with the sages of Israel in understanding that Torah keeping was not enough to overcome man's moral brokenness. Now, the rabbis didn't understand that moral brokenness the same way, but moral brokenness nevertheless. Singer's claim otherwise is not entirely honest or must be made in ignorance, because certainly it is not in line with the sages of Israel in understanding that man had an evil inclination that the Torah could not uproot, which is exactly what Paul says. How is Paul distorting the scriptures? He's understanding human nature the way that Tanakh teaches it. He's understanding that he's looking at Israel's history and understanding it correctly, that Israel couldn't keep the Torah. He's understanding the purpose of the passage in Deuteronomy, and he's perfectly in line with the idea that the Torah couldn't uproot the evil inclination in man, although he understands that evil inclination different than the medieval rabbis. So what can we say here? Well, Paul's interpreting the passage in Deuteronomy exactly the way some rabbis had interpreted it, or the interpretation of the passage which was accepted by some rabbis. If it's true that Paul's corrupting the scriptures by taking the view the passage means Torah is accessible and understandable intellectually and practically, then it follows the rabbis are corrupting the Bible in exactly the same way. Equal weights and measures. Paul is understanding Deuteronomy 30, 12 through 14 exactly as many of the rabbis understood it. Paul's teaching is a product. Now, it's more than, okay, because, but it is not outside the right line of what could be understood in that day. But even more importantly, why would the Torah include a provision because you can't keep it? In other words, why put in a provision for atonement if everyone could keep the Torah perfectly? You wouldn't need atonement because no one would sin. He ignores the principle of atonement for the inevitable violations of Torah which are part of the law. You don't put in a provision for how a child will be punished if they disobey, if they're never going to disobey. And Rabbi Singer likes to ignore the issue of atonement because it's a death knell to him. He thinks someone ought to sit down when they read Paul and they read Deuteronomy. I say when he reads the first 5 chapters of Leviticus, he better sit down. And when he reads Leviticus 17:11 properly and in context, instead of making things up, he's the one that's in trouble and better sit down. I mean, let's think about this, okay? Why is there a sin offering if there's no sin? The first chapter it dealt with all you need to have for atonement. The first 5 chapters of Leviticus are all the different types of offerings you need for a sinful people to dwell in the presence of a holy God. You don't need those provisions in a world where Torah could be easily and perfectly kept. Now, I know what he does with Leviticus 17:11, and we did that. Okay, we're sending cows to God to reunite the physical and the spiritual, which sounds almost like Gnostic to me, more than Judaism. All right. I mean, as far as like a really biblical sort of worldview here, we're sending cows. That's not what this is about. It's already been proven. No Jewish rabbi says the purpose for atonement was to send cows. God needs cows. God needs sheep. We got to get the physical with the spiritual, so we send the cows on ahead. No rabbi ever believed that or said that up through the Middle Ages. I've already read Nachmanides and his clear understanding of the sacrificial system in the commentary on the Pentateuch by Dr. Hertz, Chief Rabbi of England, the late Chief Rabbi of England. The life of the flesh is in the blood, and I've given you upon the altar to make atonement for your souls. For it is blood which makes atonement for the soul, which you don't really need because everyone keeps Torah anyway, because Torah is so easy to keep, right? I mean, I'm being a little facetious here, but you have a clear provision for atonement so that God could continue to dwell among the people of Israel because he knew they wouldn't keep Torah. In fact, and I've given this verse before, and I do not understand why Singer doesn't just live with it. This is Rabbi Joshua. This is in Ephraim Urbox. You can find it in Every Man's Torah. It's a well-known section of literature. So Rabbi Joshua said, "Woe unto us, this is in ruins, the place where the sins of Israel are expiated." Um, Now, understand that, yes, this is the point in where Yohanan ben Zakkai says we have replacements for the temple. Feel good, Rabbi Joshua. Feel good. We have replacements for the temple. You know, but you have to understand the reaction of Rabbi Joshua. The reason that Yohanan ben Zakkai has to calm this guy down is he's beside himself. He looks at the temple in ruins and says, "Woe to us, the place where the sins of Israel was expiated is gone. We don't have a place where our sin can be taken care of." What sin? We can all just keep Torah. Morally, we're totally capable of it. This is not a problem. No. The rabbis felt the destruction of the temple was horrible because Israel's sin needed to be dealt with. In other words, they expected that Israel sinned, and if you expect that someone's going to sin, then you expect they aren't going to keep the Torah. If they're going to keep the law, you don't expect them to sin. And so this is still on the ridiculous side. Most importantly, and this has been the greatest thing about coming to faith in Yeshua, one of the greatest things. I shouldn't say the greatest thing. The greatest thing is having redemption, right? But my whole understanding of the message of my people and seeing the central message of my people is different. Before, I would read the Torah and I would see something of faith, and Judaism never, outright said faith was a bad thing. Faith was a good thing. But what I never got in Hebrew school is that the central message of Torah is personal faith. Judaism won't teach that. And it is so cool to look at the Torah now and see that the central message is personal faith. And Rabbi Singer's ignoring the message of Torah. So he's saying you can keep Torah while ignoring the central message of Torah. Let's see the central message of Torah. There it is, the central message of Torah. Genesis 15:6. And he, that's Abraham our father, Abraham Avinu, our father. Let me be Jewish for a minute. Abraham Avinu. Abraham, our father, believed in the Lord and he counted it. That's the Lord. The part of, the pronoun goes back to the first noun. Counted it to him for righteousness. Rabbi Singer. Abraham kept Torah and it was counted to him for righteousness. Abraham repented and it was counted to him for righteousness. Abraham believed God and it was counted to him for righteousness. When you're talking to a Jewish person, you can't do it right away, but it is so cool if you get to the place where you say, look, you know what I want for you? I want you to be like your father Abraham. I want you to be like the father of your people. You're children of physically children of Abraham, descendants of Abraham. You should live like Abraham lived. You should be a Jew the way Jews were meant to be. Be justified by faith. Why do you seek to be justified through any sort of... Why are you seeking your justification and identity, covenant unity with God through Torah keeping, when the message of Torah is that you're justified by God through faith and God imputes righteousness? There's a central message. But don't take my word for it. This is a Talmud section. I've gone to it over and over again. All right, but it's still worth noting. Now, I got this from John Fisher because my electronic Talmud is a little incomplete, but he got it from a statement of Talmud. Now, what he's writing about here, okay, is the need for redemption or atonement. And that's why he says one thing needs to be added. All right. The statement of Talmud. Now, this is a whole debate among the rabbis. This is really cool. The rabbis start debating how many commandments one has to do to be right with God. Rabbi Singer, they were having this debate about, how many commandments are absolutely necessary, Rabbi Singer. And when the Talmud had this debate, it ends with this. Then came the prophet Habakkuk, who reduced all the commandments to one. What's the one commandment that Habakkuk reduced all the other commandments to? The just shall live by his faith. Is he saying something different than Paul in Romans? Maybe, Rabbi Singer, you need to read Romans and then read this statement from the Talmud and understand what Paul was understanding. Maybe you don't get Paul because you don't understand what Paul knew, or you aren't paying attention to what Paul understood. The central message of Torah is personal trust in God, not checking something off a rule list. Laid tefillin, check. Kept the Sabbath, check. That isn't the central message of Torah. In fact, the commandments at Sinai were not there when Abraham was around. Now, I know some people read those things in, and they say Abraham knew all the law, although the law hadn't been written. Yeah, right. Well, show me in the Torah where it says that, and then we'll have a discussion. All right, let's look at his duplicity. Rabbi Singer believes in a Judaism that required another whole oral law to explain the written law. All right, this is really cool. He believes that the Torah, which was so easy and accessible and simple to do, required an entire oral law so that people could understand it. In other words, the Torah is so easy to do that it requires no additional clarification. And everybody could just do it, right? Here's the problem. If the Torah was completely doable by Israel, why would the oral law that was not written down until thousands of years later be required to understand it? Hey, if they could keep Torah, there was no oral law to explain it, then why do you guys have to add a whole oral law to make it clear so people can keep it? If I say to my kid, don't touch the stove, and don't touch the stove is understandable to my child when I say it, I don't have to write him an entire layers upon layers of oral law for him to understand what don't touch the stove is. And if I have to write him layers and layers of additional, if I have to hand out a 60-page manual to my child to understand what don't touch the stove means, 10 years later, then he couldn't not touch the stove properly before he had the additional instruction. If you see what I'm getting at, if the Torah was so easy to keep, you wouldn't have to have layers and layers of instruction on what keeping the Torah was about. Now, interestingly enough, this is so interesting because now you have an anti-missionary that's going to the same verse, right? When Hashem gave the commandments to Jewish people, he did this so that the nation of Israel could live and not die. The Torah was given to them in a way that it could be fulfilled without having to go to heaven to learn it. How did this anti-missionary understand Deuteronomy 30? That it was accessible. Notice that. This is another anti-missionary Jewish polemicist that's understanding Deuteronomy 30 exactly the way Paul would understand Deuteronomy 30. Isn't that interesting? Those who received the Torah knew it clearly, what was required of them. Really? Okay. There were no doubts Hashem would tell them a little and did not tell them a little and leave out a little so that they should stumble or work in vain. This is so interesting. The Torah was totally capable of Israel morally, even though they couldn't understand it intellectually and practically. At least that's what Rabbi Singer wants us to believe. Because he wants us to believe a whole oral law was given because the Torah couldn't be properly understood, even though Israel could morally keep the Torah. So they could morally keep what they could not understand. Rabbi Singer, if they could morally keep the Torah, then you don't need the oral law. And are you willing to repudiate the Talmud? I mean, really? Are you willing to say that that whole oral law, and don't tell me you don't believe it, because if you don't believe it, come out and say the whole theory of an oral law is a lie. And when Judaism says there's an oral law, they're lying. Or is it that they could do it and they could clearly understand? I mean, which is it? Okay? And that's the point. This is an impractical position. You can't understand it, so there's a secret oral law that was not written down that you absolutely need to understand the Torah, but you could morally keep it even though you couldn't understand it. However, when we look at the commandments in the Torah, we have a problem. We do not know. Now, this is the position of the rabbis, okay? When we look at the commandments in Torah, we have a problem. We do not know what Hashem wants. The written law was impossible to comprehend, not because it was difficult in language, but because of a lack of explanation that exists for almost all the commandments. That's the rest of the quote from the earlier page. In other words, the commandments weren't well enough explained so that Israel could do them, but they were perfectly capable of keeping the Torah. At the same time, they couldn't understand the commandments because there was no explanation as to how to do them. Does that make any sense at all? But that's what Rabbi Singer wants us. That's what Rabbi Singer wants Christians to believe. Leave your Jesus. You don't have a fallen nature. You can just do Torah. You need to repent. Paul was a total nutcase. Really? I like the quote that just came up. I'm going to come back to it so people can see it. The sages in Israel understood, and rabbis understood much the same thing as Paul. The Torah was accessible, but people were morally broken. Paul isn't saying anything that falls way outside the lines of this at all. Now, someone made some great comments, and there's been some good scripture, so I'm going to go to the box here, and there you go. You may not be able to see this quite as well tonight. I hope you can. But I'm going to move this down. I'm going to try to move this down. Wow. Okay. And what I may do is I may pull this out a little further and bring me in so that you guys can see a little better, or maybe not. Okay. Let me do this. There we go. And we have this great quote at the bottom here, if you can see it. It's a little hard because the text box doesn't fold the writing over. But Dr. Brown likened this to saying someone couldn't do basic arithmetic, but when they were awake, they could do calculus while they were asleep. Good old doctor. That's absolutely perfect, and I love it. And so he's making claims here about Paul. And again, Paul is his favorite whipping boy. And he's making all sorts of claims here related to Paul that do not make any sense at all. And it does not work. Paul is not outside. Now, Paul goes further than the rabbis. And remember, he's enlightened by the Spirit, having accepted Messiah. But he isn't saying anything that the Hebrew Scriptures don't say, and he isn't saying anything that is so far removed from the rabbis as to be unintelligible. He didn't invent a new religion. Okay? He believed that Messiah was the fulfillment of everything his people were waiting for. Let me get my English down here. Um, and so this idea that Paul is just making stuff up, um, Paul is using the scriptures in a way that was acceptable to make points rabbinically in the day. He's following scribal tradition. He's making points that were clearly understood. And he understood that human beings were morally broken. And he understood that Israel hadn't kept Torah, which was evidence they couldn't keep Torah. The atonement system clearly was evidence they couldn't keep Torah. And that his view of humankind was very much in keeping. It was at least in the ballpark of what was understood. Again, the rabbis had a skewed understanding of the sin nature, but they did not deny the evil inclination in man. Modern Judaism has taken it a step further and moves away from that. Well, I'm going to look at the board here. It doesn't look like there are any hands raised. And I'm thrilled for everyone being here. I just really want to get things so they run more smoothly. And the last few nights have just not been real good for that. But I think the broadcasts are certainly worthwhile, and I hope people will tune in and watch them. And I think we're pretty much at the end of our PowerPoint. So I'm going to just go here. I do want to do one other thing. I want to go here real quick and thank folks. And that'll come up as I'm just looking over the chat. John Williams mentions that Paul was 300 years prior, I think prior to that commentator. And, great. Throw stuff up there. I will put the box right back up. I just want to thank people. So I just threw that up there. If there's anything you want to add or share and you want to hang out for a few minutes, that chat box will be up. I will read it. It should be somewhat readable. I don't know why it's not folding the text over like it used to. But there's that chat box. And if anybody's got anything, I will make sure the chat is visible and readable. Okay. Well, I'm just looking through to make sure I didn't miss anybody. So if you're wondering what I'm doing, I'm just kind of glancing up and down. Oh, okay. Someone has a question. And I can see the question. There we go. Okay, yeah, you can make use, by the way, of the Patreon message board, if you're a patron, and I will get back to you. And it is great to Cherry Love. Yeah, just type the question in. Just type it in. We're all going to see it, and that would be great. So, yeah, you type that in, and everybody can see it, and I can read it. So I just need it typed in. It'll take a second to come onto my thing. But if you type that in, I'll also reread it for people. But they should be able to see it. The chat box looked a little better last time. And I don't know if it's a function. Let me see if I can bring that up a little better. There we go. By the way, I do see other people's broadcasts. I don't always listen to them, but I do to everyone. But I want to just give a big welcome because I know that, in fact, if there's a way to give a shout out to Sister Cherry Love. I would love to do that. Throw some stuff up there. I definitely will do a shout out. Okay. Hebrew Israelites are trying to say God gave Moses the oral law at Mount Sinai and not the law of Moses. Oh, this is a great question. Okay. Now, I hope you can see it. I'm going to move it down here just to make sure. It'll probably take a minute or two because of the delay to show. But let me read it again. Sister Cherry Love says the Hebrew Israelites are trying to say that God gave the oral law at Mount Sinai and not the written law. I'm still playing with this to get it. Wow. What are ways to dispute this? Yeah. There's several verses that say that Moses wrote down all the law, which would indicate no oral law at all. So one way to deal with it is to say there's no evidence at all for an oral law. There's no basis for an oral law at all. Now I'm going to try to get there quickly. I have these passages highlighted, but this Bible has a lot of stuff highlighted. You could try doing a search. But there are several passages in Deuteronomy that state that Moses wrote all the things that he was given. Here we go. Well, one place you can go is it. So it was that Moses had completed writing the words of this law, in a book. Okay. When they were finished, so Moses commanded the Levites who bore the Ark of the Covenant, saying, take this book of the law. Now that would be the words he wrote down in the book, the Bible. Okay. Put it beside the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God, that it may be a witness against you. And so right there you have that Moses wrote down all the words of this law, referring to the law, in a book. There are other verses that say that all the Lord told him, Moses wrote down. Second question. The Hebrew Israelites are trying to say Paul in the book of Galatians is not talking about the law of Moses, but the oral law. Well, that's pretty good because the oral law wasn't codified until between the Babylonian Talmud, which is earlier, is between 4 and 600 AD. And the Jerusalem Talmud is in its final form at 800 AD. So how could Paul be discussing a law that was not completely written down, codified, or in any written form at all until 400 to 800 years after Jesus? The book of Galatians was certainly completed long before the Talmud was. So he can't be discussing a oral law. That's the first point, is the timeline does not match up. The second thing is that the Galatians were being told they needed to be circumcised, so I then have to assume that circumcision was not part of Mosaic law, but was part of the oral law and came much later. Because Paul is very clear about circumcision in Galatians as one of the things that they were being pushed to do. Let me go to Galatians and attack that kind of silliness. And I'm being polite about it because Paul has worse things to say about those who put people under the law. So I'm just going real quickly to Galatians, where Paul ends up talking about circumcision right at the end, and he makes some really incredible statements. and I'm just trying to get to it real quick and flip through my Bible. I have trouble. Here's Galatians. Okay. He gets pretty clear right here. Here we go. As many as desire to make a good showing in the flesh, these would compel you to be circumcised, only that they may not suffer persecution for the cross of Christ. For even those who are circumcised, not even those who are circumcised, now notice this, not even those who are circumcised keep the law. The law is connected to circumcision there. But if it's the oral law Paul's talking about, then circumcision must have been given with the oral law, not with the written law. And so now you have a timetable problem. Wow. Sister Love's asking for other good passages in the Bible to help Christians and myself refute this faulty claim. Well, let's talk about where the law was given, okay? Galatians talks about the two covenants, okay? Galatians is written definitely, I would say, before 70 AD. The law came, but we were kept under guard. I'm sorry, but faith came, we were kept under guard by the law. But if the law is before 70 AD, because we were kept under guard by the law, and the Talmud is completed between 4 and 800 AD, then how were they under the law? Which law were they under? It couldn't have been the oral law, because the oral law wasn't codified and completed. And the oral law was not previously written down. The one thing about the oral law is it's called the Torah shel peh, the Torah by mouth, because it wasn't written down. So how were they under the law that wasn't written down at the time Paul's writing Galatians? I don't even understand how that could be. So you could look at that right there when it says they were kept under guard by the law, has to be the written law. It can't be the oral law. And then if you go to verse 4 of chapter, by the way, if you're wondering where that was, we were kept under guard under the law, that would be 323. If you go to just one chapter over, okay? Okay. And you go to Galatians 4:4, when the fullness of time came, God sent forth his son, born of a woman, born under the oral law. Jesus wasn't born under the oral law. So that doesn't work either. So I don't understand how, with the timetable, these statements in Galatians could refer to the oral law at all. It doesn't seem to make any sense. So you have multiple attestations in Galatians that can only apply to the written law when you understand the timetable. Hey, by the way, with your Hebrew Israelite friends, the Talmud was not written nor preserved by Hebrew Israelites. It was written and preserved by Jews, and that's historically attestable. When you look at the names of who these people were, they were clearly known to be Jews. So now your friends are saying that when Paul talks about the law, he's talking about the oral law, which was written by Jews who they don't consider Israelites anyway. So why are they interested in the oral law that was preserved and written down by Jews, not Hebrew Israelites? Are you admitting the Jews are Israelites then? So they got all sorts of problems here. Yes, John Williams went to, and I don't know if you can see it all. I put the coding in, and I increased the size, but anyway. John Williams is writing a neat thing. He's going to Colossians, And he's just picking up another verse for you. So, thank you, John. John is usually really good about throwing some excellent uh, Bible verses. He does mention something, and I will try to go up to it with the Ramban. The Rambam is a later commentator, medieval commentator. Now, he would not be considered Tanaim. Tanaim is the first layer of Talmudic writers. The Amorim is the second layer of Talmudic writers. The Rambam is outside of that, and he didn't codify until around the 12th century. Yes, you have the Mishnah Torah. So, but that is much later. That's just a little point. So, excellent, excellent Q&A. The law, which came 450 years later, very good. That's another section of Galatians. So, Sister Cherry, you got yet another one. He's also pointing out the Talmud isn't called the law. That's true. The problem is that the Talmud is associated with the oral law, and they may be borrowing. Here's the irony: they may be borrowing from rabbinical Judaism to try and do this. Sister Jerry says they're trying to use rabbinical commentary to find a way around the book of Galatians. And isn't that priceless? Because the rabbis were all Jews. So I want that in writing, that the Jewish people are the Israelites, because otherwise you shouldn't be using their commentaries. That's like a blatant admission. That's really funny. Okay. Christian Israelites. Oh. Oh, wow. Yeah, I hope you guys can see the commentary. And I think the coding, the CSS coding is a little off. But yeah, there is some real craziness. Hey, Sister Cherry Love, you also are doing some cool stuff online. Can we get your URL stuff where people would find you so that they can find you? I mean, I love giving people a shout out. I can help you. It's a little more complicated than probably could be handled tonight. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put an email address in here. Okay. And you are free to email me, and I will email you back. Okay. So I'm making myself available. I just may not be able to cover all of that sort of tonight. That gets a little involved. If it's involved enough, it might be fun to have a program on, but I certainly want to answer any personal questions people have. So that email's up there, and I will be glad to get into more detail. Yeah, there's a point about the tradition of the elders. Jesus refers to it. At the point that Jesus is referring to the tradition of the elders, you're talking about the Tanaic period of development, just to help you out. The Amorim come around 200 AD, and then you have what are called the Amorim. So you different layers. The Tanaim were the first contributors to that body. You're talking about Hillel and Shammai, some of the other real early development, and then you go into the Amorim, which are the second layer. And then you have a third layer. So it's like a really crazy oyster. All right, I am loving the lively discussion here. I don't know that those who view this are going to be as excited about that, but no, actually, I think they're going to learn a lot through it. Let me rephrase that. They just may not be where some of you guys are, so they're going to get an education from you. Thank you, my fellow instructors. This is great. Um, so, but I love it, and I think other people will love it too as they view it because they will have the chat also, and I think that will be absolutely wonderful. So I am thrilled, and this is really great. Well, it's about an hour and 20 minutes in, and so we have had a great time. The email is up there. You also have Patreon. They have a message system. Either way, I respond to both. If there's a little delay in response, I just kind of got busy, um, either prepping things or dealing with Sunday school or some dissertation stuff came my way. But I will get back to you, and I usually get back to you pretty quickly. Yes, someone wants to share their channel. Um, yeah, throw that up there, and I will even put it in. You know, can you do that? Okay, and that's a YouTube channel. Okay, and Sister Cherry Love is doing some really cool stuff, dealing with stuff that even I don't deal with. In the way she deals with it, and so it's incredible. So if you want to look up Cherry Love, you can go ahead and okay. And someone's chiming in. Yeah, you can find you know um, you can find her on YouTube. Please tune in. And I was grateful that she came and joined us tonight. Okay, and I'll try to do what I can with it. Cherry Love was sharing. She'll send me some links. Again, I'll try to digest that. Um, if there is verbose as Rabbi Singer is, because Rabbi Singer just kind of goes on and on and on and reiterates the same points. Um, so, all right. Well, I'm going to get a little bit more dinner here and start settling in. But I am really, really pleased with tonight. I hope everything was clear. It looked like it all came out there. There may have been one or two things that could have been, you know, uh, typos do happen, but we are just thrilled with, being able to put this stuff out there and get better and better. So that's the goal. Just get better and better and put this stuff out there. So I'm gonna do a Lila Tove here. This is just for Steve if he's still around here. Steve's gotten good with his Hebrew keyboard, so I'm gonna kind of shoot here and see if I can make this work. My wife is bringing a actual new computer. This one's starting to slow down. Oh, he's there. Okay. Yep. I'm not that good with the keys. Oh, wait a minute. Huh, there we go. So I'm gonna try this here, and Lila Tove. And it didn't type it. Try that again. There we go. That's a good evening to everybody as soon as it goes up there. Lila Tove. Guys, all have a good evening and God bless. I forgot to put it back to an English keyboard. Okay. Gotta remember to do that, or I end up with Hebrew all the way through, right?